Steube from the great state of Florida. Congressman, great to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's an honor. I want to ask you first, you had a little difficulty, in fact, a lot of difficulty getting into the State of the Union last night, and yet a few hours before, you could get on the House floor, no problem. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, just 2 hours before we had votes on the House floor, and any member of Congress, regardless of what protocol you did or didn't go through, whether you had a mask on or didn't have a mask on, could go and vote just fine. Nobody said anything to you. There was no procedures put in place. And then suddenly for the State of the Union, there was a whole litany of procedures that was issued by the Speaker's office where you had to go to a specific place. Now, mind you, we have COVID tests in our office that, made in China that were given to us by Pelosi for our office use. So we have tests in our office, but you couldn't use that test. You had to go down to a specific place during a specific period of time and use their PCR test and only their test to be able to test negative within 24 hours of the State of the Union, fill out a whole medical questionnaire in order to get your quote unquote ticket to go into the State of the Union. Well, my election to my district is my ticket onto the House floor, not Nancy Pelosi's egregious, non-scientific medical mandates.
Yeah, Congressman, I'm glad you brought up the non-scientific aspect of that, because as I tried to humorously highlight at the beginning, the very serious and very scientific COVID policy. So according to what happened to you yesterday, maybe COVID only affects members of Congress after 2 p.m., or maybe it's the fact that Joe Biden was on the floor and they felt like because of his geriatric age, they had to protect him. But why did Nancy say, Speaker of the House, why did she say that there was going to be this about face? Did she have any explanation?
No, of course not. It's just like for the last almost 2 years now where we've been forced to wear masks on the floor, and then that's changed, and then it's N95 masks. And leading into the State of the Union, as early as Sunday and Monday, the guidance was that we had to wear an N95 mask or a KN95 mask. And suddenly the Democrats realized that that's not playing well in polling all across the country. And we have a midterm election coming up in November. So they changed that part of the policy the day before. And now suddenly all these Democrats who were yelling at us Republicans for not wearing a mask around the Capitol are perfectly fine gallivanting around without a mask on. This has never been about the science. It never has been. It's always been about masking Republicans and using their authoritarian dictatorship that is Nancy Pelosi and the House speakership to put their regime on the American people and Republican members of Congress.
Yeah, pretty extraordinary. I want to take you to a moment last night where Joe Biden says, the answer is not defunding the police. We're going to fund the police. That's the right answer. 3 hours before that, one of the subcommittees on which you serve, the House Judiciary, the Subcommittee for Crime and Terrorism, announced a hearing called Reinventing the Police, which I assume, and I want to ask you this, is that the new code word for defunding the police for Democrats?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Instead of saying defunding the police, because that didn't work well in polling either now a year later, despite the fact that they've done it. They've defunded police in New York City, and you've seen skyrocketing crime rates, skyrocketing homicide rates, and that rhetoric that went through all this last summer and for a year of Democrats attacking our law enforcement officers, trying to take money away from their budgets. We've had a record number of law enforcement officers that were killed in the line of duty last year. And it's because of the rhetoric that was coming out of Democratic-run cities and states and up here in Washington. And that had a direct result of the way that our law enforcement officers were treated. And in those cities, they actually did defund our police departments. And so now we're just going to change the language a little bit. And now Joe Biden's going to say, oh, we're not for defunding police. We're for funding the police, despite the fact that for the last year they've said otherwise. Well, I think the American people are a lot smarter than that.
I would tend to agree with you. And I feel like this is putting lipstick on a pig, because it's not necessarily the words defunding the police that minority communities have a problem with. It's the act of doing it, where they're not having their answers or their phone calls answered by law enforcement, and they're not showing up at their communities. So regardless of whether they want to call it defunding the police, if they reduce the budgets of law enforcement across the country and they are not able to effectively take care of the people in their communities, it's still a losing issue for them.
And it is, and that's happening in Democratic-run cities all across the country. And we've seen the results of that in the high crime rates. And you're also seeing the fact that they can't now recruit officers to come and work for their departments. Some of these departments, I think Minneapolis was one of them, is now doing an about face and suddenly realizing that taking money away from their law enforcement officers, they're seeing the high rise in crime and businesses are leading, and suddenly realizing that they need to reinvest into their police departments that they took money from. Well, officers aren't coming back to departments like that for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And then with the vaccine mandates, you're losing thousands of officers to that as well. It's just remarkable. I want to talk about another form of crime. Just a few minutes ago, Congressman, federal prosecutors in Chicago announced the indictment of one of the most powerful Democratic figures in Illinois history, Mike Madigan, the former State House Speaker. This is one of about a dozen cases where Democrats around this country have been indicted for corruption in the last few months. Does the Democratic Party have a culture of corruption problem going into this election?
Well, it certainly appears to be. And there's been this entire trend, at least for the last 2 years, where it's been the rules for thee and not for me type of mentality. They do things that they accuse us of doing. They do things like during the whole Russia collusion hoax, when it was really Hillary Clinton that was actually colluding with Russians to do the dossier, to then surveil our own American citizens and use that as a reason to have this talk about Russian collusion with the Trump campaign for 2 years. So it obviously is more about the hypocrisy of the left than anything else.
Yeah.
Congressman, we've just got a few minutes left, so I wanted to ask you about your new committee for agricultural producers. We've got a supply chain crisis in America. People are having a harder time finding goods to put on their kitchen table. Talk to us about this committee.
Yeah, I'm the #1 citrus producing district in the entire nation. I've got cattle, I've got dairy, I've got citrus. It's a very large agricultural producing state in Florida. We call it the heartland of Florida. And so I thought it was very important to hear directly from our agricultural producers of the issues that they're facing and have an avenue of communication directly between them and me on all the issues that they're facing. And you touched on one, the supply chain crisis. Our citrus growers get attacked not just naturally with natural disasters and freezes and frosts and insects, but a lot of different other issues that face our growers. So I'm happy to put together an advisory committee that can directly give me guidance on what we should be doing up here in Washington to help them.
Yeah, such an important thing. We got about 90 seconds left. I want to ask you, last night there's a moment where the president boasts that we're going to go after those oligarchs. We got a Justice Department task force, the people who've been pillaging Russia and Ukraine. Wasn't his son, Hunter Biden, the guy working with those oligarchs in Ukraine and Moscow? And do you think most Americans looked at that and just rolled their eyes?
And made millions of dollars and some money
exactly.
for the big guy, was going on. Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's back to rules for thee, not for me. I can't wait to take the majority back and start investigating some of these things that have been happening during his vice presidency, during his presidency. And one other quick thing that I thought was interesting was, we're going to crack down on Russian international flights to the sound of applause, but we're not going to actually do anything that affects them financially and cutting off Russian oil and sanctioning Russian oil.
Yeah, that was quite a moment, almost breathtaking to realize it. And Joe Manchin calls him out on it just before the speech, saying this is hypocrisy. It's really something. Congressman, we got about 20 seconds left. What message do you think Republicans have to counter today and tomorrow, the president's speech?
Well, we have to talk about what our agenda is. I thought it was also interesting in his speech last night, and I about came out of my chair, was that suddenly we're going to, stop illegal immigration and secure the border is what he said. We're going to secure the border. Well, Trump had the border secure. He's the one that has opened the border and now allowed more than 2 million illegal immigrants to enter our country. The reason that those between 18 and 45 are dying, the #1 cause of death, is fentanyl. You know where that's coming from? The border.
Yeah, absolutely, Congressman. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. We really enjoyed it. Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, Amanda and I are going to be interviewing the one, the only Dr. Ben Carson.